Welcome to 13 Cubed. In this special episode, I'll be interviewing none other than Lesley Carhart, or Hacks for Pancakes, as you may know her. Lesley, thanks so much for joining me.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Awesome. Apologies that I am not on video. For whatever reason, I'm having technical difficulties with Discord, of course, right as we start the interview. So, that being said, I think that most people watching this probably know who you are, but in the off chance that they don't, would you mind telling us a little bit about you?
Sure. My name is Lesley Carhart. I work for a company called Dragos these days, but I've been in cybersecurity, specifically digital forensics and incident response space for about 15 years. And specifically, I tend to work in the non-standard computer space, so the industrial computing space. So cybersecurity for power, water, manufacturing, aviation, things like that. I also served in the United States Air Force for quite a long time, retired from the reserves. And I do a lot of volunteer stuff for the cybersecurity community in my free time. I blog, I run a small conference, and I do a lot of speaking around the world on educational cybersecurity topics, something I really enjoy doing. In my free time, I teach kids how to punch things in karate.
Very cool. All right. So that's a good segue to the next question, which is that with industrial or like ICS or OT cybersecurity, that's a field that, like me personally, I don't know a whole lot about that because I work in the standard fields, if you will, with just standard Windows endpoints and whatnot. So what is the day-to-day job like at Dragos? And more specifically, can you tell us a little bit more about ICS and OT cybersecurity and how that is different from the normal cybersecurity?
So there was a time where they were kind of similar fields in early IT-OT convergence. So what you saw happen in the industrial space is for a long time, industrial control devices were serial devices that weren't networked to anything you could consider a traditional network. But in the last couple of decades, manufacturers have realized that it's much, much cheaper and more efficient to use commercial enterprise grade IT equipment to build industrial technologies on top of. So that includes switches, routers, PCs, at least at the higher levels of the industrial devices, not necessarily the low level PLCs and sensors and things, but now all those IT technologies and networking exist in the OT environments as well, in the industrial environments. And we also have seen a big push to connect them to traditional networks. Usually there's some kind of DMZ separating industrial devices from the corporate network, we hope, not in every case. Sometimes it's kind of leaky. But in the end, I mean, there is a networked connection ultimately between the enterprise network and the internet and these very sensitive industrial networks. And industrial networks have a lot of caveats with them. First of all, there's huge life and safety consequences if something goes wrong in them. So there's a lot of potential for actual physical harm. It's not just some money getting stolen or something. It's potentially people dying, the environment being contaminated, a facility setting on fire, things like that. So very serious consequences with those devices being tampered with. And they're also very old and very sensitive because the life cycles on industrial technologies are very long. They're decades long that you go without a major system upgrades. You can't just piecemeal replace in pieces. That could cause that same health and safety risk if they don't work right with the older devices. So as DFIR professionals in this space, we have a lot of other stuff to think about. So we're dealing with these very sensitive, very old technologies, mostly enterprise technologies, but there's also the lower level PLCs and things that can't be tampered with or modified very much, and we have to manage to secure them despite the fact they're now being exposed to modern threats. And from a DFIR perspective, investigation perspective, we are much more limited in our tooling. So while there's been a convergence in technologies between IT and OT, I sometimes say that there's a divergence between the DFIR skills, which is deeply problematic when you want to train and hire new people in the space because so now we have people coming in the DFIR space who are just out of university, who they learn how to do things with modern enterprise technology. So there's a heavy reliance on agent-based forensics and EDR, XDR, and none of that stuff exists in DFIR because it's technology from like 30 years ago, and then all the industrial stuff. So there's the skills are diverging, and it makes it very challenging to train more new people in the space.
Yeah, makes sense. All right. So, what characteristics of incident response in particular would you say attracted you to that field over like defensive or offensive cyber ops?
It's certainly a challenge. It's a huge challenge. I mean, I have an investigative mind, and I like walking into fires. That's just my personality, and you need to have that to be happy and differ, I think. But in this space, there's no bigger crises than potentially people being injured, dying, et cetera, in an industrial environment. The work is very, very, very meaningful to secure those devices, to prevent them from being compromised again. That has real meaning. It's a real mission every day. There's no question like, hey, am I kind of doing something dubious? Like, what am I securing? Like, it's even if I don't personally like, love the company that I'm securing, as a human being, if something goes wrong there with their industrial devices, people will be hurt. People will die. There's no question there that they need to be secured. They need to be defended because the consequences to humans and to the environment and the world in general and people's safety and health long term are so, so important.
Yeah, makes sense. Makes sense. I think my job, a lot of times I complain, I'm like, oh man, this job's so hard, but I can't imagine doing this job if people's lives are potentially on the line if something goes terribly wrong. So
Yeah.
that's even more stressful. And I totally agree. The work is absolutely meaningful and critical. So makes
Yeah.
sense. Um, to that end, what advice do you have for someone looking to transition into information security in general, which can go a number of different directions from another technology field? Because people end up encountering this catch-22 situation in which you've got relevant experience and or certifications that are required, but they can't get their employer to pay for like SANS or some of their training until they're in that position. So then how do you get in that position?
Oh, those concerts. Yeah.
Yeah.
So first of all, I mentor a lot of people. I actually have open mentorship on my Mastodon where I meet with some people I've never met before every week and I talk to them about their careers. So I talk to a lot of people who are young in their careers and mid-career and transitioning to cybersecurity. And one of the biggest things that I run into that's very challenging for people is that you really need to decide what niche you want to go into. At the early levels, at least, whether you're going to go blue team or red team, whether you're going to do defensive or offensive security. Um, and then in what space are you going to work for the government? Are you going to work for private sector? Are you going to work for a municipality, et cetera, et cetera? So all those things are very different and they require different qualifications. They require different training and they're a different path, a different, fairly clear path into getting to those niches. And something that's very hard for people like us who like to learn a lot of stuff in cybersecurity, and most of us have that hacker mind and we want to learn everything, is that you can't learn everything in cybersecurity anymore. There's just too much ground to cover. So a lot of people kind of get wishy-washy and they can't pick a focus, and then they get certs all over the place and they spend a bunch of money on it. And it's never bad to learn, but their resume is just it's all over the place and you can't see a clear direction. So it makes it challenging them for them to find a job and to focus on getting the qualifications they need for that job. So if I could tell people who are thinking about getting into cybersecurity and are facing challenges, one thing, it's as you seek mentorship, as you decide how to apply for jobs, pick a direction in cybersecurity. And that can be very hard. It's hard to narrow it down, but that's going to help you focus your money, focus your efforts, focus your times. In terms of getting a job when certifications are expensive, you shouldn't need a ton of certifications to get a entry-level cybersecurity job. They're going to look more at your work experience and your critical thinking and your understanding of security concepts. So you shouldn't need a SAN cert to get any reasonable cybersecurity job. Of course, there's unreasonable job postings out there, but there's plenty of security operations and junior cybersecurity jobs out there that you can get with just some of the basic, pretty affordable certifications in that niche.
Makes sense. Yeah, I was talking to some people entering the field fresh out of college, and I was explaining that I've been around a while in this field. I think I've worked in tech for 27 years now, so been around a while, and I've seen a lot of changes. And one of the things is that when information security was just becoming its own thing and kind of diverging from just standard, IT type work, it was like it was easy to say, well, I'm going to go into information security, and people kind of understood what that meant. And then things started getting more and more fragmented, right? Where you had
Yeah.
red team, you had blue team, you had, now the concept of purple. You've got forensics. You've all these different specialties you can go into, and then even within forensics, it's now
Oh,
becoming
yeah.
even more fragmented because you've got the type of forensic investigation that you do. You've got mobile forensics, which is a completely
Oh,
huge
totally
field on its
different
own.
beast. Cloud
Yeah, yeah,
forensics.
cloud,
Yeah.
exactly, exactly. So that was one of the things that I too had to kind of pick early on, and so I picked obviously the endpoint, like core Windows and Linux OS forensics, and while that doesn't mean that I know nothing about the cloud stuff, certainly I'm not like an expert for cloud or for mobile or whatever, because I can't be, like, I can't learn everything, right? And I think that goes to what you're saying. You've got to become a specialist in something. Being a generalist
Mhm.
is not necessarily going to take you on the career path that you probably want to get to, right? Got to
Yeah,
focus.
if you become a generalist, you're going to be working for a small business where they have one cybersecurity person. You'll never be able to deep dive. You're just going to be the person who knows who to hire in the specialties. And that's not bad if that's something you want to do, but you'll basically, be their virtual assistant or, whatever, and buying services from somebody else. You'll be the person who knows, hey, I need somebody who's an expert in pen testing and hiring them. You're not going to be an expert in pen testing. There's just no time, no way that you're going to have the bandwidth to learn all that stuff and do all that stuff. So you'll have the inch deep, mile wide knowledge of cybersecurity. And if you want to focus your career in becoming that kind of security leader for a small business, that's perfectly valid. But again, keep in mind that doesn't mean that you get to know everything about forensics and pen testing and malware reversing and threat intelligence. You're just going to know enough to hire the right people.
Yep, makes perfect sense. Yep. Let's talk about the whole debate, which often is something that gets brought up in our field, and that's college degree versus certifications, right? Because you hear all these
Mhm.
people talking, well, you absolutely have to have a college degree, or no, you absolutely have to have a certification, and the degree doesn't matter. And then you've got other people who are like, well, no, you've got to have both. But honestly, just from my perspective, I think it varies greatly. Some of the smartest people that have ever worked for me or that I have worked for have had no college degree at all and no certifications. They've just been excellent at critical thinking. They have that kind of mindset where they want to learn and absorb as much as they can, and they're awesome at their jobs. But what do you think?
Yeah, you can see I've got certifications on my wall behind me. I've got degrees on the wall behind me. I've got military stuff on the wall behind me. And I put them on my screen for some very specific reasons. Not for this call, but for other ones. Hey, look, there are many valid tracks to getting into cybersecurity. It's very different than when I got into IT 20 something years ago, when I got into cybersecurity 15 years ago. Um, Things have changed a lot in that space, but there are still a lot of valid tracks to get into cybersecurity. You can go to some kind of boot camp and get a crash course. You can get a formal degree. You can do the expensive certification route. That's totally valid too. You can self-study, build home labs, participate in CTFs, things like that. I won't pretend that some of them aren't more challenging for certain types of work than others. Like if you're going to go work for the government, they're going to look for degrees. If you work for the private sector, it's much more fluid about what they'll hire people as long as they meet the qualifications with. So there may be requirements for specific degrees or certifications depending on where in the world you're applying and what type of work you're applying for. In general, if I ran the world, I'd say get whatever training will teach you the best. People learn in different ways. There's kinesthetic learners, auditory learners, visual learners. Find the training that educates you and informs you the most. And that's really, in the end, more important. There are problems with some of the cybersecurity degrees out there today. I will say that there's some bad degree programs out there where they're just trying to make money off of people wanting to get into cybersecurity. And you really need to be careful vetting any cybersecurity degree program or training program that you get into in general and make sure it's credible. There are people just trying to make money off of this being a hot career.
Makes sense. Yep. You also brought up the fact that home labs is an option for people. That's something I tell people a lot that are trying to get into cybersecurity, into whatever discipline in cybersecurity, is to go on eBay and buy a cheap used Dell or something and throw ESXi on there, right? Because you can
Mhm.
download ESXi for free. or at least there's a free version of it. And spin up some VMs and just play around and learn that way. Learn by doing. Don't be afraid to break something. It's a virtual machine, right? Take a snapshot, do something, break it, revert it. Learn by doing. And and you can do that on the cheap in a lot of cases, right? You don't have to invest a huge amount of money in equipment. So I think that's super valuable for people. So
I think so too. And there's a lot that you can learn about differ. And you always have evidence. That's a great thing. You always have evidence to examine, to learn about forensics, because you've got a computer and you've got a phone and you've got a tablet and things. So you've got evidence all the time. You can examine your own stuff. Some of the commercial suites are still hard to access for students, for people who are learning, and that's unfortunate. I wish that was more accessible. But there are a lot of things that you can learn today in terms of open source tooling, in terms of learning about computer forensics and mobile forensics and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it's better than it was certainly 10 years ago or 20 years ago when I was first thinking about getting into forensics. You don't have to go to a course for a specific commercial tool to do the stuff in the field at all, which is how it was then. Now there are open source tools that are valid, legitimate forensic tools that you can learn at home.
yeah, definitely makes sense. So once you do get your foot in the door at an incident response role or forensics role, what would you say that for a newer person in that field, what would their career progression look like? Or what specifically should they be doing to set milestones and get to that next level? Do you have any kind of general advice?
So usually if you want to get into differ, and there's always multiple routes into everything. Don't like yell at me because I'm talking about one common path when there's 5 million different paths. But usually the common path to getting into differ is to work in a SOC for a couple of years. And I recommend that to a lot of people. I know it's kind of grunt work, but working in a security operations center as an entry-level job gives you exposure to a lot of different stuff in cybersecurity. It gives you an idea of which niche you want to do. It's a good lead into differ because you're handling a lot of cases, you're learning to threat hunt, you're learning how to analyze and think about problems and deal with crises. So it's a really good segue. You're not supposed to work in a SOC for your entire career unless you're managing it. Like you're supposed to do that for like a year and a half to 3 years and then transition into a niche where you're a specialist. Um, but that's a really good valid route to make it into differ. It's hard to just move into differ off the street. And again, I don't want to gatekeep. Again, there's 5 million different ways to get into different things, but differ requires several discrete skill sets that you have to learn somehow. So you have to learn the forensics. And if you're doing that for an enterprise or for OT, you need to learn like memory forensics, disk forensics, and network forensics pretty well. And then you also have to build the crisis management skills. So incident response is dealing with investigations during crises. And that is a challenge of its own. It's a human challenge. It's a project management challenge. You're walking into somebody's worst day ever, whether that's your organization or somebody else's organization as a consultant. So there's these discrete skill sets you have to kind of evolve in yourself to be good at differ. And yeah, there are some occasionally entry-level jobs in differ that'll train you up in places that have pipelines. But the safest bet usually is to work in a SOC for a couple of years, triaging stuff, dealing with different types of forensics and cybersecurity, and then make the move into differ. It's going to be a very painless transition.
Nice. Yeah, it makes perfect sense. Some of the people that have worked for me in the past have done that exact same thing. They've worked in a SOC and then have transitioned very successfully, I might add, into a different role using the experience they gained there with the SOC work. So I think that's perfectly
Just
perfectly
one
valid.
easy path,
Yeah.
one easy path. And again, I'm not trying to gatekeep. You might find an entry-level job in differ and be very successful at it. It's just there's a lot more SOC jobs out there, and it's very easy for a differ manager to hire somebody from a SOC to be an analyst.
Yep, makes sense. All right, so slightly different topic. What would you or what do you do to stay up to date on the latest information in information security, especially digital forensics, right? Because there's always something new. Maybe it's a little different for your specific flavor of forensics, right? Because of the nature of the
Yeah.
equipment you're dealing with. But in general, what would you say people should do to keep up to date in this fast-paced career field?
Yeah, I was gonna joke there with you. I don't have to keep up to date because I still deal with Windows NT, in the industrial
Yeah.
space. This is where we go when we don't want to learn, Kubernetes in the cloud and stuff. But to keeping up to date, we really need to be, no matter what technologies we're working with, we really need to know what the adversaries are doing. So we need to have good eyes on threat intelligence. And that can come from a lot of different sources. It can come from your ISAC. It can come from open source intelligence, just watching Mastodon and Twitter, listening to podcasts, however you learn again, you know. I still use an RSS reader. I do a lot of RSS feeds. I do spend a substantial amount of time in my day before or after work reading up on cybersecurity news to know how the adversaries are positioning and what things are being targeted, more than new technologies in my space particularly. But I also go to training every year. I haven't. There's like misconceptions about me out there that I know everything, and I certainly don't. I still have to keep learning. I still have to go to training classes. I still have to learn new forensic skills all the time. All the time. It's a never-ending process. I will be 60 years old in this field and I'll still have to learn new stuff, because the landscape is always evolving. The technologies are always evolving.
Yep, no doubt. Very cool. If you could begin your incident response journey like all over again, what would you change, or what advice would you give yourself?
It was a very, very different world when I got into cybersecurity, and certainly when I got into IT in the 90s. I don't think the advice I would give to myself in 1998
Mm.
is the same advice I'd give somebody today. And I think in a lot of ways things have changed for the better. I had a tremendously difficult time finding mentorship because, it was a small, very tight-knit community, to be the most gracious at the time, in forensics, and nobody wanted to train anybody new. Nobody wanted to mentor anybody, especially somebody who didn't look like them. Um, Today, there is so much more space for mentorship. I tell junior people today, take advantage of that. Find a mentor. Take advantage of all these security meetups that are around you. I mean, I've been doing that since the very beginning, but again, they didn't exist when I got into the space. So there are most major cities, and even some moderate-sized cities have a B-sides conference every year. Go to your B-sides, meet people, talk to people more than go to talks. Um, Go to see if you've got a DEF CON local group, see if you've got a city sec group in your area that meets, maybe a couple times a month. That's a great way to find people. A lot of people in cybersecurity like me, we want to help. Bandwidth allowing, we really want to help you. And now there's these wonderful community groups out there. And if you're in the military, there's AFCEA, MCPA. There's a lot of good governmental organizations too. The world is your oyster to find people to help you in cybersecurity today. And I'm just so shocked by people who don't take advantage of that.
Very good point. Yeah, B-sides is awesome. That's one of the things I did when I was transitioning
Yeah,
from just IT into information security in general, is start going to B-sides. Awesome. So,
they're fabulous and they're low cost.
yeah, absolutely. Yep. All right. Last serious question before I ask you a couple of fun questions. What do you think the biggest knowledge gap that you see today would be in incident response or digital forensics in general?
Yeah, it's over-reliance on XDR and EDR. I'm really concerned about that, not just for the industrial space, but in general. There aren't a lot of people learning old school traditional like hard drive forensics.
Yep.
There's a lot of focus, not just in college programs, but especially in our pipelines. So like, ooh, how to put this diplomatically? A lot of the MSSPs out there that people come up in because they get entry level jobs there and they hire a lot of junior cybersecurity people. They are monitoring EDR. That is their job. And that's not bad. EDR is amazing. I wish it existed in industrial because it's a fabulous tool and it's easy to put all of your reliance for forensics in it. Like it does tons of the work for you. Of course you were going to do that. But the problem is a lot of the people who are at like 2 years at cybersecurity, they only know how to use EDR. Like they don't know how to go take a raw image of a computer, and they don't know how to use a write blocker, and they don't know how to look at partitions on a hard drive. Sometimes they know how to do some memory forensics with volatility, but that's like maybe a maybe if they can do that. So I'm really worried about the loss of traditional forensic skills because they still do matter to in-depth investigations and they matter in spaces where EDR doesn't exist, like legacy technologies.
Yeah, absolutely agree. One of the things that I've seen too, which is I guess tangentially related to that, is that a lot of times people are very reliant to, and I'm not going to name any vendors here, but there's some amazing software out there that's literally almost at the point of point and click forensics, right?
Does the
Click the
job
button.
for you. You need to understand how your tools work.
Yep, exactly. So, you press a button, it spits out some output, you get something that says prefetch. Well, what's prefetch? What exactly does that mean? If you interpret something incorrectly, or one of the more complicated artifacts like shimcache, if you don't really
Mhm.
understand what you're looking at, then you're going to potentially make some very incorrect assumptions that could lead to some bad things, right? And I was talking to
Mhm.
a buddy of mine that used to work in law enforcement, and that's kind of a challenge there too, because a lot of law enforcement agencies don't have traditionally trained like forensic investigators. They have people that have had those skills kind of bolted on, right? So they're a traditional investigator, so they have that mindset. But as far as the digital
Yeah.
forensics component of it, they're relying on these kind of more point and click kinds of tools. And even this person was telling me that if you had asked one of them, one of the people he had worked with, to parse the MFT, they'd be like, "Well, what's the MFT? I don't know what that means. Like, what is that?" You know, they only know what the
I'm
tool is.
not on camera. I'm double face palming right now. Oh my God.
Yeah, and
Okay.
it's kind of scary, right? And
And it's
so
not the fault of the people who are getting trained
no,
necessarily.
no,
This
no,
is this
yeah,
is I'm talking to the people who are running pipelines right now. Don't just teach people how to click buttons. Teach
yeah,
them what they're doing with those buttons.
absolutely, yeah. I think that's a huge point for sure. Cool. All right. So, just a few fun questions, and then we'll wrap up. Um, if you had to predict the future, what security threats do you think we'll face or continue to face throughout the rest of this year and into the next?
Pretty serious cybersecurity question, isn't it? And criminals are always going to criminal. Countries are always going to spy and do sabotage and things. That's never going to change. And I think that's something that people just can't get their heads around. Criminals are getting better and adapting to they are a business. Cybercrime is a billion-dollar plus industry, and they are in business to make money with the lowest margins possible. So they're getting more efficient at choosing targets. They're getting more effective at doing things in a way that will elicit payment for ransoms and back and things like that. And of course, it's a cat and mouse game. It's always a cat and mouse game because they're always going to try to steal things because that's their business.
Yep.
They're in it for money. And, as we go into the future, that's never going to change. There's never going to be a moment where we have perfect security and they don't do that anymore. Our security has improved on a lot of desktop computers to a point where traditional malware methods aren't being employed as much. There's a lot more social engineering involved and exploitation of systems that are still vulnerable. They're strategizing. They're a business, just like we are as defenders.
Yep. Makes sense. Uh, PC or Mac?
I'm in the strong, strong, opinionated camp of use whatever the hell works for you. I
There
have a
you go.
little bit of both in my house,
Yep.
and this isn't like a wishy-washy answer. I am of the very strong opinion that keep your opinions about your operating system to yourself. They are all Linux, Windows, Mac, BSD, whatever. They are all totally valid options for doing forensics. They're totally valid options for being a cybersecurity professional. Use whatever the hell works for you and stop trying to convince other people to use the same operating system as you.
Well said. Just within 10 feet of me, I have all flavors, right? I've got Windows, I've got Linux, I've got Mac. Yeah, I think that's some great advice. Use what works for you. All right. So, Star Trek or Star Wars? This is very serious.
I'd say I'm a Trekkie. I'm a Star Trek fan, but I do have a Star Wars themed living room because it just makes a better living room. I like them both, but I like Star Trek much more. I'm a big Trekkie.
Awesome. Same here. Huge Trekkie. Are you watching Picard?
I'm watching all of them. I'm
Awesome.
caught up on everything, I think, right now, except I wish I wasn't caught up on Picard because it's very stressful. I don't like
Yes.
cliffhangers. Very
Yeah,
stressful.
it is very stressful. Yep. Yep. All right, cool. Well, you know what? I just want to say thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule for this interview. I really appreciate it. And yeah, where can people find you online if they want to connect or follow some of your work?
Sure. I am Hacks for Pancakes at Hacks, the number four pancakes on pretty much everything, social media wise, even TikTok, yes. So I have a pretty good social media presence under that name. You can find me on LinkedIn too. I'm the only person on the planet Earth with my name. And I have a blog. It's tisiphany.net. It's linked on all my social media. And yeah, and I'm running a conference. I'm running a conference in a couple weeks on the 19th called PancakesCon, and it's free. It's streamed virtually, and I hope that you can tune in and give it a watch.
Awesome. Yeah, I'll have to put the link to that in the description for this video. So very cool. All right. Well, again, thank you very much, and it's been a pleasure.
Thank you for everything you do.
Thank you.